Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin in the Yukon, where residents in Watson Lake say they need long-term care options. It comes after a story from CBC last week about a couple in their 90s from Watson Lake. They've been forced to live apart because the only long-term care available is 5 hours away in Whitehorse. That has residents wondering why there isn't a facility in their community. The mayor of Watson Lake is the latest to weigh in on this discussion. Chris McIntyre has more.
Before the Watson Lake Hospital was designated as a hospital, the space was meant for long-term care, but that never happened due to structural issues with the building. In 2022, the Yukon government said it would place 2 long-term care beds in the town's hospital. Last December, Yukon's health minister claimed the town wanted the plan to be put on hold. Chris Irvin is the town's mayor. He says he nor council ever opposed having beds or increased healthcare services.
Stating that that wasn't the comment from the municipality, that might have been misconstrued from comments throughout the community. I think the impression that I got from the community was that the 2 beds that were suggested to be used at the Yukon Hospital were not sufficient. Not that we didn't want them, it's just that that isn't the solution that our community is looking for.
Irvin says many longtime residents of Watson Lake are now seniors. He says a quarter of the population will face a similar situation to Evelyn and Lloyd Kostick. Married 75 years, Evelyn now lives in Whitehorse because there are no long-term care options in Watson Lake. Irvin says it's simply unacceptable to split up families when they're so vulnerable.
Ev and Lloyd Kostick have been a part of our community for the entirety of their lives, and great, upstanding citizens that can't stay at home. Nobody wants to be separated at this point in their life after spending that much time together, and it truly is heartbreaking.
Yukon's Health Minister Tracy Ann McPhee says the government already funds 4 long-term care homes in the Yukon, 3 in Whitehorse and 1 in Dawson City. She also said that the government could expand long-term care to other communities. Irvin says whether it's beds or a brand new facility, anything is welcome. Chris McIntyre, CBC News, Dawson City.
The Northwest Territories Union of Northern Workers is accusing the territory of trying to open all healthcare jobs to agencies. The union made the accusation in a recent update on collective bargaining with the territorial government. Luke Carroll explains.
The allegation posted on the union's website didn't have many details, and the union said in an emailed statement it wouldn't comment as it goes into mediation this week. But the online post accused the territorial government of demanding a letter of understanding that would open the door to contracting out all of the GNWT's 2,100 healthcare workers. The union says that's one of the only things standing in the way of a new collective agreement. A spokesperson for the NWT Department of Finance says the territory is engaged in the bargaining process and won't comment on it. The territory paid $5.2 million to agency nurses last year. These are nurses that work for a private company who are paid significantly more than those employed by the territory. A memorandum of understanding in the current collective agreement allows the government to hire agency nurses. Both the union and the government initially signed off on that memorandum in 2004. They agreed to renew it during COVID. It allows the territory to hire agency health workers as a last resort. The spokesperson for the territorial government says that agency nurses make up less than 1% of the territory's total 2,100 healthcare workers. The health minister said in a previous interview with CBC News that agency nurses are used as a last resort and that the choices are to hire them and pay more or to cut services. Luke Carroll, CBC News, Yellowknife.
The 2022 federal budget has been officially delivered, and there aren't many surprises. The government had already announced several programs. The big question, though, was how the government would pay for everything. Rafi Boudjikanian gives us the answer.
Mr. Speaker, we are acting today to ensure fairness for every generation.
With multiple announcements over the course of weeks aimed at addressing Canada's housing crisis, the government has revealed how it plans to pay.
To responsibly build a fairer future for younger Canadians, we need to make sure our tax system is fairer.
That means going after capital gains, like the sale of a secondary home, for the country's wealthiest and corporations. Individuals to pay taxes on 2/3 of anything they make above $250,000 a year, businesses fully moving to that rate.
This new revenue will help make life cost less for millions of Canadians, particularly millennials and Gen Z.
Support for the Liberals with that demographic has plummeted in opinion polls. The $23 billion housing program in this budget hopes to win them back. $8 billion of that in spending, the rest in loans. Ottawa even wants to convert some underused Canada Post and military public land into housing and spend up to $500 million to buy unused public land from provinces or cities. For this observer, an obvious play.
Targeting the main political areas, I think, that have really challenged this government, like housing and affordability, might not even be in their jurisdiction, but they're responding to the need for action by Canadians. Certainly the text emphasizes the demographic that's, I think, become a little distant from this government.
But to even get there, the minority Liberals need opposition help to pass the budget, and it's not clear they'll have any.
This is the 9th deficit. The 9th deficit after the Prime Minister promised the budget would balance itself. Conservatives will vote against this wasteful, inflationary budget.
We have some serious concerns, and I want to hear from the Prime Minister what his plan is to address those concerns.
With surveys also showing concerns over too much spending, the government does not want to increase its $40 billion deficit this year. This may not be the last pre-election budget the Liberals are planning, but they are banking on it paying off for them at the polls. Rafi Bujikani, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Yukon Chamber of Commerce isn't blown away by this year's budget. Its executive director says the government could have done more, especially when it comes to small businesses.
I see the budget as a mixed bag. There are some positives, such as housing, that could benefit the socioeconomic landscape of Yukon. However, I'm very stunned by the lack of specific supports for small businesses, for the health sector, and the potential and what the potential increased tax burden could be from the digital services tax.
Panton says many Yukon businesses are struggling with high levels of debt. He says the government could have played a role in alleviating that pressure by pausing debt payments and by reducing the tax burden on the private sector. Meanwhile, Canada's overall inflation rate ticked up slightly in March to 2.9% from 2.8% the month before. Despite that, there is growing confidence the Bank of Canada could soon cut interest rates. Nisha Patel has more.
Canadians paid more for gas last month. Air transportation and restaurant meals were also more expensive. But one of the biggest drivers of inflation these days is the cost of shelter.
My rent went up $700 for the same space, so it's pretty frustrating to see what's happened in the last few years.
It's impossible to rent an apartment unless you're a two-income household.
I don't really spend money if I can help it, because I mean things are getting tougher, and I only assume they're going to get more tough, right?
Rent prices climbed 8.5% compared to the same time a year ago, and the cost of interest on mortgages was up more than 25%. Still, the overall inflation rate is inching closer to the central bank's target, and officials say the trend is encouraging.
Measures of core inflation did tick down again, and that does suggest that underlying inflationary pressures are continuing to ease. So we continue to be moving in the right direction.
The Bank of Canada could start cutting interest rates as soon as June, even before inflation gets back to 2%. But some risks remain.
We can't forget what's going on in the Middle East. If we do get another shock to oil prices in particular, that could be, that essentially throws everything out the window.
And economists warn that while interest rates went up quickly, it's unlikely they'll come down at the same pace.
The bank is going to take its time, making sure that we're not going to see a resurgence in especially real estate markets.
Though for Canadians weighed down by the high cost of borrowing, a little relief could go a long way. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
A fire broke out Monday night at a waste yard in an industrial area of Yellowknife. It happened at a site owned by KBL Environmental in Cam Lake. By Tuesday morning, the scene was taped off. Melted waste could be seen in the yard with scorch marks on the side of the building. KBL President and CEO Jeff Dirks said in an email to the CBC that the fire department responded to the fire around 10:15 p.m. on Monday. The facility and property were unoccupied and there were no injuries. A nearby resident who called the fire department says he thinks it was put out by about 1 a.m. KBL's president says the material that burned wasn't hazardous, but they are investigating just to be sure. He says general shop waste, debris, and old personal protective equipment were all burned in the fire. Dirk says they will be conducting an assessment of potential impacts and they'll clean up anything they need to. He says they don't know how the fire started, but they do hope an investigation by Yellowknife's fire department will determine it. The city says the fire marshal is investigating the cause. 3 Yukon First Nations are gearing up to release what they call a land relationship plan. The Carcross, Tagish, and Kwamlindun First Nations and the Ta'ang Council share overlapping land claims in southern Yukon. As Katrin Pilkington reports, the strategy has been a work in progress.
The plan is shaped by science, heritage, and tradition. It began back in 2017. The 3 nations committed to create a unified vision for the Southern Lakes region, rooted in Indigenous storytelling, law, knowledge, and science. Bailip Peters-He is an engagement officer with Ta'ang Council. She's been working with elders to record and capture their knowledge of the land in order to make decisions for years to come.
It means that my First Nations thoughts and opinions, that they matter and that they're being taken into account.
Elders say as development interest continues to rise in the Southern Lakes region, understanding the value of the land from an Indigenous perspective is critical.
I think, basically, the 3 First Nations, Tahan and Kwamlindun and Carcross, figured that land use planning wasn't working for us. So we wanted to more or less go back to our roots, which was Indigenous-led land use planning, where we talk about everything that's on the land, not just and not to map it out, but to walk it like we say. How we walk this land and water means literally walking the land.
Leaders hope to be able to share the land use planning document with the public by 2025. Katrin Pilkington, CBC News, Whitehorse.
Johannes Lamp has been sworn in as the president of the Nunatsiavut government. Lamp was acclaimed earlier this month and sworn in yesterday. This will be his 3rd term as president and the 2nd time he ran unopposed. Lamp is an expert in the Inuit land claim agreements that have been signed with the federal government. He says the push to get new leaders in the government is going well.
And I believe that community challenges teach an individual a lot, and more certainly Labrador Inuit have gone through a lot of community challenges, and regionally too. And so I am hoping, that within the next 2 years, where general election is coming up in 2026, that there will be more of the new generation of Labrador Inuit leadership coming on.
Lamp says there are still many challenges that Inuit face, including a housing crisis, food insecurity, and infrastructure gaps. He says the Nunatsiavut government is lobbying the federal and Newfoundland and Labrador government to fix these issues. The media landscape has shifted dramatically in recent years. That's especially true for teens who get much of their news from social media, where misinformation can run rampant. But some young people are learning how to scrutinize what they see online. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson explains.
If we want to go even deeper onto this, we can...
He writes for his school newspaper, but even Samir Ferdowsi once fell for a post falsely advertising a Drake concert.
Immediately I saw my friend the TikTok post about it, and it turned out to be fake.
But with new fact-checking skills he learned while attending a workshop run by the media literacy company Media Smarts, that's not likely to happen anymore.
We take any images, and if it's a video, we take a screenshot, take that image, and we reverse image search it, right? And if this thing has been republished from a previous article or source, we understand that it's kind of fake or it's a little misleading.
Samir is one of a few young Canadians chosen to join an elite international squad of teens making TikTok videos to teach other teens about misinformation and fake posts online.
This is not legit. Be aware that these false posts might use photos or videos out of context.
Media Smarts is leading the Canadian project.
They're speaking the same language. They're, tend to be consuming the same kinds of media and on the same platforms. And so there's a credibility factor that's really important.
Because immediately...
It's not the only project of its kind.
There was a couple of people who were laughing.
This New Brunswick teacher has been using the Control F videos from education group Civics to talk to her students about misinformation online.
I don't see that moment of glowing happiness when they learn this. It's definitely more a source of frustration. But what I do appreciate and love with the students when we talk about this is that afterwards that they're heavily engaged in conversation about what is reliable and what is not.
But is it covering the whole story?
A conversation Samir Ferdowsi hopes to contribute to.
If we search up Prada, spacesuit for NASA,
becoming an influencer who can influence other teens to look carefully at what they're consuming.
That's why it's always good to check.
Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
That showed me that the
Tingali waling muluk panguluk asyang miu muna toy muina daily tapang kimuk sa palilok sa mutay mabuhat taling ni pilariulok sa Inuit amichwalu walang muta.
I will not forgive failure. God has chosen us as a new broom to sweep the Vatican clean of corruption.
What would you like to do with your life?
I'd like to be an international star.
Are you a hug?
You're crying.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
Well, God will take his revenge then.
Yes, he will. With our help.
What does it take to reach the top? Join me, Ian Hannamansing, as I get to know some truly inspirational people who share the secrets of their success.
If you want to talk about one moment, it's a moment where I would live or die.
It changed everything on CBC News Explore.
Edmonton's fire chief says the city is ready for wildfire season. He's referring to fighting grass fires and fending off wildfires, but he's also talking about being ready to take in evacuees from other places if need be. Travis McEwen has the details.
Grass burns like this have ramped up in the city over the last couple of weeks, around 5 to 10 per day. There's been about 145 grass or wildfires in the city since January.
We're watching for spikes, size, and different indicators on which all contributes to our determination of what kind of restrictions and methods we need to put in place to mitigate those risks.
Edmonton's fire chief says he and crews are ready for spikes based on dry conditions. Grass fires like this one south of downtown last year show how fast they can grow in the city. Edmonton Fire is being proactive when it comes to Edmonton's River Valley, monitoring areas with trees deemed as high risk for burns.
If there's a response in the River Valley this summer, they can expect to see a lot of resources. Whether it's the aerial truck that's set up behind you, connected to a hydrant, or our staff in the unit behind me, or in which we have multiple of these units that can get into areas where a large apparatus can't and be able to spray water.
Last year, the city hosted 12,000 evacuees from Drayton Valley, Edson, and the Yellowknife area. The city's emergency response team has found extra options for reception centers like schools or universities, based on how many communities are evacuated.
We will continue to support our neighbors in their time of need in a heartbeat. and ensure that they have a safe place to come to. The fact remains that opening reception centers last summer required an incredible amount of resources.
At the moment, there aren't any fire bans in the city, but they'll likely come as the temperatures heat up. The city's fire chief recommends Edmontonians keep up with fire-smart tips to protect their homes from wildfire risks. Travis McEwen, CBC News, Edmonton.
Canada is coming off its worst wildfire season on record and also one of the deadliest. 8 firefighters and contractors were killed on the job last year. Preparations are underway for another long, hot, dangerous summer. A group of new recruits is wrapping up its training in Alberta. And along with the physical demand, these firefighting recruits are learning about the mental hazards that can come with the work. Julia Wong has that story.
Aaron Curd says this is where he belongs, on the front lines of the wildfire fight.
I was actually watching the media about last year, and I saw how the wildfires were impacting the communities here in Alberta, and how it was actually impacting the rest of Canada as well. I felt like that this could be a cause that I could contribute to.
Curd, who used to be in the military, is among more than 500 people trained this season to work with helicopters, lay down equipment, and respond to fires. But Curd says he's been preparing psychologically as well.
I like taking my own time, really separating myself from my job sometimes if it gets really busy, and then just focusing on myself and what I need to do.
Last year, Canada saw its worst wildfire season in a century. Fires started early and were unrelenting. With dry conditions in Alberta, this year may be no different in the province.
Because the seasons are longer and more intense, it requires us to be very clear about what fatigue and cumulative fatigue looks like, be really clear about some of the mental health issues that can come as a result of working extended shifts many days throughout the entire summer. Make sure that we've got a little slack in the hose there.
And mental health is one of the things instructors want recruits to be more open about.
We always talk about the hazard of fire behavior, slip, trips, falls. The mental health hazards are equally important, and we need to make sure that we're trying to get that into our everyday conversation.
That's not to say the physical risks of the job have been forgotten. 8 people working on wildfires died last season, according to a report by Natural Resources Canada.
We certainly are open in talking about the past as a learning experience. So what can we learn from those really unfortunate deaths, fatalities, serious injuries?
For Curd, even with all that considered, he's ready for what this season could bring.
We're all very aware of what we have moving forward, and just keeping healthy, keeping our morale up.
A job that could see him working for weeks at a time, putting the lessons he's learned to the test. Julia Wong, CBC News, Hinton, Alberta.
If you want to buy a recreational vehicle to drive this summer, you're in luck. It's a buyer's market right now. Sales soared during the pandemic, but have since sizzled, and many RV owners are trying to get rid of theirs. Paula Duhotchuk has more.
All right, here's the unit.
Jason Huntley bought this RV in 2018, but with his kids growing up, he's trying to sell.
Has everything you need from home on wheels.
Emphasis on trying. It's been listed online almost a year.
I've let the ad expire, as you would say, and then restarted it a few times. But interest is pretty minimal.
Problem is, the market is very different from a few years ago. RV sales surged during the pandemic.
It was a way that people could still travel and have family vacations while staying close to home.
But these days, people who can afford to go on vacation can take an airplane to get there. Plus, amid high interest rates and inflation, other people who may want an RV just can't afford one anymore.
People have a little bit less discretionary income, and so they may have delayed their purchasing.
People aren't just putting off their purchases. A growing number are also selling off their RVs using the website rvdealers.ca.
We get people trading in their units, and we also have the certain cases where people maybe decided to just get out of the lifestyle completely.
It was basically turbocharged demand, and that's not sustainable permanently.
Still, this analyst thinks the industry will bounce back.
Many of these customers are going to stay in the outdoor lifestyle, And I think that's going to help sell more RVs longer term because you're going to have a wider customer pool than you did pre-pandemic.
As for seller Jason Huntley, he still expects some short-term trouble unloading his RV.
I don't believe we've seen like the worst of it yet.
He's still hoping to sell, but isn't holding his breath. Paula Duhacek, CBC News, Calgary.
People looking to stay at NWT campgrounds this summer can start reserving sites today. Campers might notice some changes when booking this year. There's a new website for reservations. NWT Park says it's more user-friendly. People will also notice that Escarpment Creek in the South Slave is not available this year. That campground is closed after extensive fire damage from last year's wildfires. But there is a new campground opening in the North Slave near Betchicole.
You're right on the North Arm, you're right on the Great Slave Lake, so obviously the view is going to be spectacular. Yeah, you get that pristine, quiet area. You're not in town, and you can have some nice, quiet spots. We've got a gatehouse available for use, and it's wooded, it's private. I think it's going to be a nice site for campers.
McCabe says campgrounds in the North and South Slave closed down 6 weeks early last year due to the wildfires. They're hoping for a normal season this year. And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
What happens when we transform the country into one massive obstacle course? 20 total strangers are about to find out.
Okay, game on!
Relationships will be forged and crushed.
I want to rip their heads up.
In an all-out battle for glory.
Oh my God! I'm glad that there's cameras around. Yeah, me too. Do it in, replay.
Only one thing's for sure. They are not ready for what's coming.
Let's go, baby!
Sipping on a bit of Henny. Can I get a little Remy? Feeling heavy, chilling but I'm feeling ready. Pulled up in a big old Chevy. Dance floor stops and me gal damn drops. Queen with the locks and the crown on top. Feet in a box, never sound on pause. If it ain't the Henny, give me crown on rocks.
What does it take to reach the top? Meet some truly inspirational people as they share the challenges and secrets of their success. It changed everything on CBC News Explore.
Sipping on a bit of Henny. Can I get a little Remy? Feeling heavy, chilling but I'm feeling ready. Pulled up in a big old Chevy. Dance floor stops and me gal damn drops. Queen with the locks and the crown on top. Feet in a box, never sound on pause. If it ain't the Henny, give me crown on rocks.
What happens when we transform the country into one massive obstacle course? 20 total strangers are about to find out.
Okay, game on!